You are listening to the Speech Space Podcast, a podcast full of tips and resources for SLPs. I'm your host, Jessica Cassidy, and this is episode 21. Hey everyone, Jessica here from the Speech Space, and I just want to say, I'm going to rant here for a second. I am exhausted today. I worked a full day at the hospital today, and although I am very tired, I'm actually quite thankful because for whatever reason, I get a migraine pretty much every time I work at the hospital, and I don't know why that happens, but it does. So I am lucky to be migraine free, but I am also very tired here this evening. But I am here, and I am looking forward to talking with you about echolalia. So I'm going to be summarizing some really great information from a helpful article called Examining the Echolalia Literature, Where Do Speech-Language Pathologists Stand? And that is by Lillian and Stiegler. I hope I'm not saying her name wrong. We'll go with, what do you think? Stiegler, let's go with Stiegler. Okay, so before I get started though, I'd love to know, what is your perception of echolalia? Do you see it as something functional or something that should be extinguished? You know, years ago, I had a client who was demonstrating echolalia, and her mother was really concerned about it. Now, I tried a few things to minimize the echolalia. They honestly were not very successful. But when I started looking into the literature, I actually saw that echolalia can be useful. And now when I say useful, I mean that it has a purpose. You know, what's interesting is that while a lot of the research out there, or a lot of what you see whenever you're trying to find information about echolalia, you'll see lots of articles or blog posts, videos about extinguishing echolalia. Now, but linguists have analyzed transcripts that include echolalia, and their analyses of this echolalia have revealed really important insights, patterns, and characterizations of echolalia actually show that they can be a key communicative adaptation, a cognitive tool, and also a self-regulatory tool. So it's not necessarily something that we want to be extinguishing if it's serving these functions, but you know, the issue is that we're not always knowing what these functions are. So before we go any further, I would like to formally define echolalia. Now I'm going to take these definitions right out of that article that I mentioned before. I will be linking to that article in the show notes, but I did want to give the article full credit for these definitions. So immediate echolalia, it applies to echoic utterances produced within two conversational turns of the original and resembling the original utterance segmentally and or suprasegmentally. Now, the resemblance may be rigidly exact, or it may be selectively mitigated. And delayed echolalia applies to echoic utterances that A, are produced more than two conversational turns after the original, and B, is either characterized by a higher level of linguistic complexity than the individual could generate independently, or identified as a learned routine by familiar communication partners. And these delayed echoes may be pure or mitigated as well. Now, let's talk a little bit about how echolalia can be helpful. Some children acquire language in a different way with more of a top-down approach, also known as a Gestalt Processing style. Instead of single words, they capture longer units of language, so their units are sentence length strings marked by intonational contours. Although these units are long, only one unit of meaning is actually attached. So, for example, an utterance such as "put it on the table" might just mean table to them, or "don't touch the stove" may mean stove. When Gestalt processors express their longer units, their motor speech capabilities can't keep up, so their output can be perceived as unintelligible pre-linguistic jargon, even though that isn't actually the case. The Skirts collaborators from Present et al. In 2006 indicate that echolalia and autism spectrum disorder is actually a positive prognostic indicator. And a lovely example was cited in the article that I mentioned. Most of this information is coming from for this podcast today. And it comes from Blank. And she used the example of saying that, if a student were to say something like, and now for our feature presentation, she used that as an example of a gestalt that might be communicating eagerness or readiness for something to happen. So, this, of course, would be an example of delayed echolalia, but I think it can be such an important point because say this were to happen in a social skills group, you might be inclined to think that this student is off topic. However, maybe not. Maybe they are on topic, but they're just not able to communicate it in a way that we understand. And that is what I think is really so cool when you dig into the literature here. It seems like sometimes we're missing something. And if you really do a careful analysis, perhaps you can figure out what the communicative purpose is of your student's echolalia. Now, I will leave you an example of this before I go today. In a case study by Local and Wooten, they examined echolalia in an 11-year-old boy with autism spectrum disorder named Kevin. Now, they went through over 4 hours of recordings of his interactions and found about 25% of his utterances to be immediate echoes. It was determined that almost all of Kevin's pure echoes were preceded by high constraint adult questions. And to go a bit further, some of his echoes, which they described as unusual echoes, were determined to be a first response device that Kevin used in situations when he was not able to formulate a quick response. So the authors actually concluded here that he was acknowledging their question and marking it as significant. So I don't know about you, but I geeked out a little bit at that. It really got me to thinking about how if we look a little closer, what we might find with some of our students and clients with echolalia. And quite frankly, it made me a bit excited that perhaps I could gain a better understanding of how their echolalia might be serving a communicative purpose for them. One last takeaway from this article that I want to leave you guys with today is to work on facilitating low constraint interaction styles with these students who are demonstrating echolalia. Now, this is because using too many questions and commands or creating these high constraint type utterances are actually known to frequently elicit echolalic responses. All right, so there you have it. Hopefully some useful tidbits about echolalia that you can apply in your own practice. And before I go, I wanted to remind you guys that the digital SLP membership price is going up on November 15th. To lock in your rate at almost 50% off of the valued price, go to www.thespeechspace.com/digital-SLP. For those of you that are already members, I would like to let you know that I just added the No Print Thanksgiving vocab builder, and the No Print Winter Elementary Language Pack is almost ready and will hopefully be going up by next week. I also want you guys to keep an eye out for the No Print Football biographies. Those are coming soon in the No Print Credit Store. And I'm also going to be adding some helpful homework sheets for articulation that I will be adding hopefully by the end of this week. All right, so that is it for me for today. I hope that you all have a wonderful week. I will not be here next week because of the Thanksgiving holiday, but I will be back the following week. I hope that you all have a happy Thanksgiving and get to eat lots of yummy food and spend time with your loved ones.